Hello, and welcome to the Climate Conscious Podcast. I'm your host, Derval Barzey. And as we kickstart season 8, today I'm switching seats from host to guest. This episode features my interview on the Global Yaadie podcast, hosted by my fellow Caribbean podcaster, Dana Lynn Swaby. Hope you enjoy.
Hello, this is Raymond, and you are listening to Global Yaadie.
Global Yaadie. Global Yaadie.
Welcome to the Global Yaadie podcast. Global Yaadie captured colorful and powerful conversations on climate, culture, and sustainable living.
Hello, this is Sammy from Nigeria. It's good to have Global Yaadie back.
Global Yaadie.
Hello, my global family. Welcome to the Global Yaadie podcast. If you're listening for the first time, thank you so much for tuning in. I know you have options, so it's really a blessing that you're able to tap into this platform. And for our regular listeners, you know you are appreciated. Thank you for sticking and staying with us. Now, I'm excited, and I know I always say that, but I have my podcast sister friend all the way from Trinidad and Tobago joining me for yet another episode. She's no stranger to the Global Yaadie guest seat. So help me welcome Derval Barzey, founder of the Climate Conscious podcast. Derval, welcome again to Global Yaadie.
Hi, Dana Lynn, and hi to the Global Yaadie community. So happy to be here again.
Yes.
How are you?
I'm great, and I'm really excited once more to be speaking to you. I think both of us coming into our 4th year of podcasting. This makes year 4 for you as well, Derval?
Yes, imagine that. 4 years.
Yeah, so we are still, the toddlers at daycare, but maybe, of course, we've evolved from daycare, but just like, those ones that going from preschool to high school. So definitely podcast contemporaries in that respect.
Yeah, it's been a journey.
Yeah, so I'm quite familiar with who Derval Barzey is, although obviously this time around I'm always going to get to know more. So Derval, I don't want to do the standard read your bio. I want you to share with our listeners a little bit about yourself, your background, and maybe even your work outside of podcasting.
Sure. So I'm Derval Barzey, a Trinidad-based sustainability and social impact consultant. And as Dana Lynn said, I founded the Climate Conscious podcast back in April 2020. With a mission to increase public awareness and provide solutions for sustainable development, focusing primarily on areas such as climate action and gender equity. So, my career trajectory, outside of podcasting, has been very interesting. Starting off in environmental management in the oil and gas sector, then transitioning to sustainable energy policy, and now getting more involved in climate and gender justice. So on the podcast, I share stories of resilience, shifting the Caribbean narrative from victimhood to innovation, creativity, and strength.
Definitely. So, and of course, listeners, naturally, you're going to have to check out the Climate Conscious podcast if you haven't been doing so. And I'm sure, most of our conversation today is going to even whet your appetite, to discover more of what Derval does. But Derval, even a little bit outside of when you're not podcasting, because I remember you shared some things on Instagram, and I feel like, your life before podcasting was also exciting. Like you were a makeup artist at one point, were you not? Doing stuff for Carnival?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, so what were some of the other things that you did even before immersing yourself in the sustainability space?
It's so funny that you brought that up because it feels like, a lifetime ago. I spent about 5 years doing makeup artistry, and that was very exciting, immersing in that fashion and beauty industry. Before really, I think, making that switch to become more focused on sustainability and climate action. I also dabbled in a bit of massage therapy, photography, Latin dancing. I feel like I always have to have a creative outlet, and it just so happened that currently the podcast is that for me. So I feel like when I'm not podcasting, I'm thinking about podcasting.
Yeah. I need to get into other things because, when people look at me and I tell them that I have a podcast, it's like, of course you do, because, I am never, I'm always talking. But, clearly there's more to you than what meets the eye, as people will say. And I think it's all the more interesting and wonderful that all those life experiences have culminated into the work that you've been doing. Again, I spoke about the fact that you're 4 years into having launched the Climate Conscious podcast. So I want to say congrats, because obviously I am one to say that it's no easy feat. And both of us in the Caribbean space, and even though it's a similar boat that we're in, it's like, we all bring our different flair, and we all, and we both can learn from each other. And I've always been admiring the work that you've done, the people that you've spoken to, the content that you've put out, and so many other ways that the podcast has evolved, Climate Conscious has evolved, and we're going to talk to you about that. But I want to ask you, what has your journey been like now that you're at year 4?
Yeah, such a good question. I would have to say it's been amazing. It's been a learning and a stretching experience, because I entered into this, I think, not really knowing what I was getting myself into, but I jumped in and I held on with both hands. And, many podcasts succumb to pod feed, as you would know, which is, when podcasts kind of die out after a couple of episodes. But the Climate Conscious is still alive because I really enjoy doing it. I get to learn so much while, sharing my expertise. And I think the best thing about it is it has given me the ability to engage with a range of people, a diverse group of people from across the region. I love that the Climate Conscious is a regional platform, and also it extends to the diaspora, as well as our allies, spread throughout the global north. So it's been an honor for me to really amplify the voices of Caribbean people, especially marginalized groups, which include women, youth, and indigenous people, so I feel privileged to have this platform and the support that I have gained over the years. I don't take it lightly, because, we know we live in an age where there's so much competition for our attention.
Yes.
And the fact that people would take the time to listen to the podcast, and they would share feedback in terms of the fact that they're learning, and it's helping to expand their perception of things. That is really fulfilling. And I must say, I'm really glad that you and I connected along that journey, because when I started podcasting, there weren't many, I wasn't aware of many other Caribbean podcasts. I think the one I used to listen to back then, before I even started, was one by Tammy Chin. She had a podcast that I used to listen to.
Tammy tackles everything.
Yes. I think that really got me to fall in love with podcasts, and then it being done by a Caribbean person really inspired me, even though it wasn't the same topic,
Yeah.
But I'm glad to say that now there's like a bit of a community developing in this space, and that is also encouraging.
I love that, and I feel like I also sit from a place of privilege just to be able to relate to your experience as another Caribbean podcaster, also disseminating climate content and spreading awareness and amplifying our voices, as well as the voices of people outside of the Caribbean space, because then it solidifies what it means to have found a niche community, and even being able to collaborate with you beyond the podcast conversations, but through the Caribbean Women for Climate Justice series, which you'll touch on, and the other works that you've been doing. It's really good to get that validation simply by having somebody else doing similar work as you, being able to learn and being able to justify the importance, to say there's a need, to be able to be in this space and to do what you're doing. So I draw encouragement from it, and even, just being in that circle with you as well. So it's really good. So that I just brought up, the Caribbean Women for Climate Justice series, I think, has also represented the evolution of climate conscious on your brand. So I love how you've been able to build this movement around your podcast. So it's more than just a podcast now, because you're doing so many things.
Yes.
But talk to us about the Caribbean Women for Climate Justice series. How did that come about?
Yeah, so I think the podcast, and as you said, it's more than just a podcast. The platform is really built on a model of partnership and collaboration. And the Caribbean Women for Climate Justice, represents, as you said, the evolution and the expansion of the platform, right? So in 2022, when I was thinking about how would I mark the anniversary of the podcast, that would have been the second anniversary of the podcast. And I wanted to have some type of event. The year before, I had a virtual, I had an Instagram live for what I call Climate Conscious Week. And of course, you want to improve, you want to expand, you want to do something bigger and better. So I had this idea of doing something to bring people together. Yes, people listen to the podcast, but how do we bring the message to the people that we're trying to reach and also help them relate to it more and more? And I always say, I want to move from awareness to action. So I reached out to the Breadfruit Collective, which is run by Christine Samaru, who had been on the podcast, and we had spoken about gender and environment. And, we decided to do a virtual conference. And, we kind of settled on women and climate, helping people to make that connection. Because at the time, even for me, it wasn't as glaring as it is now in terms of the gender differentiated impacts of climate change. And also linking that back to the climate justice discussion. So we decided to host this virtual conference, and we started from scratch, just building it out, conceptualizing the different panels, tapping into both of our networks. And you got to realize that there are so many people spread across the region doing the work, doing such amazing work in little pockets. And then you see that if we come together, if we build community, if we build alliances, I firmly believe that our impact would be even greater. And that is what CW4CJ has come to represent, a platform for community building and for alliance building so that we can expand and increase our impact, raise the profile of people who are doing the work, increase public awareness, and ultimately inspire action that would advance climate and gender justice in our region.
Amazing. And you did it for 3 years, right? Because I feel like last year was the third staging, was it?
2 years. We had it for 2 years.
And it feels so long standing. It felt like it felt like it was 3. And I must commend you, Derval, and I have to give you your flowers. And I'm happy that you're on my podcast now and I can give you your flowers in this forum, because just like you said, CW4CJ, Caribbean Women for Climate Justice, you having that staging of those conferences, what it also brought across to me is that we have to check ourselves when we do the declaration of nobody. And when the declaration of nobody, I just made that up on spot. Clearly no one knows about that. But it's like when they said, oh, nobody's talking about this, nobody's doing this, because through that movement, it allowed me to see so many movers and shapers, not just shakers, but shapers, of perspectives and actions and community of, that we had that large pool of people who were focusing on climate and gender justice, even before we knew about climate and gender justice. So it brought together, as you said before, so many people who are immersed in this work. And the more you talk about an issue, is the more you start looking to it. It's the more you start seeing it and hearing it everywhere, and you get to better understand. Because I heard you when you said, even for you, it wasn't as glaring, that distinction between climate and gender, or how it, or the intersection, really, how the two connects. and how women are affected. And for me, it was the same thing. I got that appreciation, and now we've got to see the rise or learn about the existence of so many individuals, organizations, and communities who are mobilizing for climate and gender justice, doing work to protect women, to amplify women, and to really fight for the rights of women. And I keep on saying women, but now we've even come to appreciate and to accept and understand that gender justice is, even though historically it's about the disenfranchisement, there I go with the big words, of women's rights, but it's also now giving space for diverse groups and the LGBTQ plus community, the queer community. And as much as that can be controversial in the Caribbean and in some parts of the Caribbean, the reality is that we have to acknowledge and hold space for people who have the means to contribute to the conversation and who are also impacted by climate change. Sorry.
Yeah, I think we emphasize being as inclusive as we can. And yeah, it's been good to see the expansion of the community. Our mission is to give a voice and give a platform to marginalized groups that are, not included, not integrated, not given meaningful opportunities to participate and to influence decisions. And you, Dinalyn, have been involved from the very start, the first year as a contributor, and then the second year as part of the planning committee. So I'm really happy to have had you on board and for you to bring a contribution, especially the creative aspect of it. And I think that's another highlight of CW4CJ in terms of the various modalities that are involved, so that you kind of see that there is a point of entry for everyone in this climate and gender justice discussion, whether you are an academic, an entrepreneur, a creative, we each have a part to play.
Yeah, you're definitely right, and it meant so much to be able to participate on both accounts, and especially as part of the planning committee, it also gave me an opportunity to also turn my podcast experience into something more than just promoting awareness. It was about building connections, being part of building community, because we saw where, people who participated in the Global Yaadie podcast were also able to create another bridge and really unfold in that space, even not just women, men and other persons who identify as part of other genders. So as you said, the inclusivity and the opportunity was very much eye-opening and appreciative of what we're honing here. I'm just really so proud of Caribbean activists and leaders and community movers in this kind of space. So I'm pulling from what you said, your intent about wanting to move awareness into action. So you did that with the Caribbean Women for Climate Justice series. And also you are, I don't know if you still are, co-chair of the Canary Working Group on Gender and Climate Justice. Canary is Caribbean Natural Resources Institute. So as part of their Caribbean Climate Justice Alliance, you co-chaired that working group. What was your role? What was that experience like as well? What did you do as a co-chair?
Right, so the CW4CJ platform led to Christine and I being invited to co-lead the gender working group under the Caribbean Climate Justice Alliance. And that alliance has 8 different priority areas, one of them being gender equity. And so we were charged with coordinating the members of the alliance who had an interest or a role to play in gender justice in the region. And we got together and we developed, building on the work that was initiated with CW4CJ, we developed a collective advocacy agenda that would represent the priority areas and the priority actions that we would want to see implemented in the region to advance climate and gender justice. So again, that represented something that was aligned with the objectives of CW4CJ and aligned with moving from awareness to action, where we build this community of individuals and organizations with an interest in gender in the region. And we identified areas, common areas that we could collaborate on and work together to implement. And I must mention that, as part of the Alliance, Canary recently published the Caribbean Climate Justice and Resilience Agenda, which the collective advocacy agenda forms part of that under the gender track. And that was launched during the COP 28 proceedings. So again, we want to take things off the page. So we were able to, and I know we'll get into that. One of the outputs of that, or the outcomes of that work, is the Truth Be Told campaign, which we just concluded.
Man, that was literally my next question, because I've been tracking your activities, and I want to say kudos though. Kudos to your work with that, because even though, I was at COP, and man, it was my fault. I was late, but I showed up just at the end of the launch of the Climate Justice Resilience Agenda. But I'm just really happy to see the kind of work that has been documented and put into a tangible document that is also meant to be a living, I like to say living document, because it's not just about the words on the page. How can people use this as a roadmap and as a guide, for those who are serious about climate and gender justice and gender equity. How can they use this as a guide to apply and implement in their own spaces? So that's exactly not all that it represents, but an important part of what it represents. So commendations on the work with that. So I'm gonna just say it like how I meant to, as proof that I was literally going to ask this question, that you've just concluded another great collaborative project, the Truth Be Told campaign. What truth were you telling? What truth should be told? Tell us about that.
Yes. So the truth is that, climate change is not gender neutral.
You should have said truth be told. Yeah, let's start that. Truth be told. And then you get to
truth
say.
Be told, climate change is not gender neutral. And therefore, our actions, our responses cannot be gender neutral, right? They have to take into account the gender differentiated impacts. And that's a gap we have observed in climate action, both internationally and regionally. So we wanted to draw attention in parallel with COP28, where everyone's attention was on, the Paris Agreement and, all the activities in Dubai. We didn't want the gender aspect of climate change to be lost. Because we know that if decisions are made, if policies are implemented that do not factor in gender, then they won't be as effective as they could be or should be. And we won't be making the necessary progress that we need to make as a region that is so vulnerable. The truth is that, the region itself is vulnerable, but even within the region, there are groups that are even more vulnerable, even more exposed. And we have a responsibility, I would say, to ensure that those persons are, involved in decision making, that their needs are acknowledged and catered to, right? And for me, it's important for us as Caribbean people to tell our own stories, to put forward our own solutions, and to take charge in implementing those solutions and strategies to build a resilient and sustainable future for ourselves. I always say that no one is coming to save us. And we see that. We see the reluctance of the global north to take, the level of action that is needed to address climate change in terms of mitigation, in terms of transitioning their energy systems, as well as, it took a while for we see that, there was the agreement for the loss and damage fund, but that itself took a while to be operationalized, and we're still, still figuring that out to an extent, right?
Yeah.
So while they drag their feet, we are being affected. And because of existing inequalities when it comes to gender, we find that women and other groups are also being more adversely affected. So we really can't wait, and we have to advocate for ourselves, and we have to demand action, and we have to, do our part to bring about the changes that are needed. So that was the motivation behind the Truth Be Told campaign. And again, we wanted the work of the gender working group to hit the ground, to jump off the page and hit the ground. And we think that an important step in this work is public awareness.
Yeah.
Public awareness with the average citizen, but also increasing the awareness of our policymakers.
Yeah.
Do they understand the gender implications of climate change?
Yeah. Yeah, truth be told, that's some truth right there. But I love the intention behind this campaign. And of course, I've been a fan. I've been following. I love the inspiration because there were some amazing initiatives. I saw the blogs, the competition, other activities. So tell us, although it has concluded, but of course, it's like a legacy building things because there's so many pieces from that campaign that people can still interact with. So can you share with us some of the activities that were unleashed during the rollout of this campaign?
Definitely. So the Truth Be Told campaign was based on 3 key pillars or 3 tracks. The first being public awareness, the second being policy advocacy, and the third being visibility for the people that are doing the work in our region. So we relied heavily on social media to reach the English-speaking Caribbean, and that involved, graphics, videos, posts. We also had blog posts on the website, podcasts, and the blog posts we really used to drive home our policy recommendations. So we invited different stakeholders to present their policy recommendations on how we can improve climate and gender justice. So we featured, indigenous people, youth, of course, men, of course, the queer community was represented as well. And we also had an in-person element, so we were able to take the campaign offline, and that was really special. We had 2 events, one in Georgetown, Guyana, and one in...
the link up.
Yes, the Truth Be Told meetups in Guyana and Trinidad. And that was so nice to allow activists and, interested persons to come together and share what they are doing, what they are interested in, and again, identify opportunities to collaborate, And another key highlight of the campaign was our arts competition. And I know that's something that you would be especially interested in, right?
Yeah.
So we invited persons to express their view or their understanding of climate and gender justice. And we received such amazing submissions. The judges had a really hard time in selecting the winner, but it was so good to see the level of engagement. And we tried really hard to have diverse offerings so that, we could capture the people who like video, the ones that like to read, the ones that are into art. We tried to reach as a wide cross-section of stakeholders, and I'm really proud of what we were able to produce through this partnership and all the contributors and our partners. We had 16 organizations that endorsed the campaign and helped us to promote and to share our key messages. So, the campaign is over, but the work continues.
Yeah. Man, I just hate how my good ideas always come at the end of things. Because now when you speak about it, and maybe sometimes, it's unfolding in a way where like I saw it, I was for it, and I just never thought about my little poem And it's so interesting that point that I did at the end of the Caribbean Women for Climate Justice Conference is that I was partly enveloped in imposter syndrome. And I'm realizing, like, oh my God, it could have totally worked for this campaign. And even though it's a side of me that you know about, it's still on the shy side of me, believe it or not, in comparison to how easy I am able to, like, do a podcast interview or something. But, it emerged. That poem was as an ode. I was invited to, like, do a guest speaking presentation somewhere, and I wrote that poem in honor of the women in that room, being from a rural community. But listening to you talk about so many elements of what the campaign represented, I was just happy that you were able to create that space for so many people to express themselves, because not every gender activist is a scholar. Not everybody is a community leader to, like, coordinate a training or build capacity in some way. But, there are people who are able to let their art speak, whether it's word, whether it's through visual representation or performance. And I love that. And what a striking piece. The winning piece, which I'm happy is from Jamaica. But wow, that was powerful.
It was.
Absolutely powerful.
So big up Lindsay Collins.
Yes. Can you describe that piece for us, if you can, do it justice? No pun intended.
You put him on the spot.
Was it Lady Liberty with a sword, and it was, the blind?
It was actually entitled Justice Denied.
Justice Denied.
And I think it was a great representation, I guess, of the work that is still before us.
Yeah.
And the challenges that women and others face.
Yes. Yeah.
So, and she did also provide a description of an interpretation of her piece. So I invite persons to check that out on the Climate Conscious Instagram.
Yeah, let me see if I can also pull it up right now, because it was, like, in some WhatsApp group, and I know I shared it. Justice Denied. So she talks about a revised model of Lady Justice who emerges from a broken earth. The broken earth symbolizes the debilitating effects of climate change. And this woman, albeit based on Lady Justice, has her eyes blinded, is chained, her skills broken, and her sword dipped in blood. The blindfold represents a failure to address and acknowledge the intersectionality of climate and gender justice, which will cause especially women of color to be chained to a narrative of great injustice. The broken scales lead to an unjust path that encircles her, which represents the disproportionate effect of climate justice along gendered lines, including but not limited to forced migration, droughts, poverty, restricted education, and increased gender-based violence. Her sword, which is largely considered the executioner of justice, strikes her and changes the light to blood. A failure to see and address this issue will cause a swift execution of injustice and destruction. And I'll stop there because, like you said, our listeners need to really, to seek out this piece for themselves. It's painfully beautiful, because, like, I don't want to just say beautiful to kind of mask the seriousness behind what it's depicting, but just the way that it has been conveyed is exactly what art is supposed to do. It's supposed to move you, and definitely the depth of thought and intellect behind it is also something that's mind-blowing. So thank Lindsay, and also, again, kudos to you, the Climate Conscious and the Bird Fruit Collective, for kind of creating this platform for people to make their contribution in this way.
Yeah, and two other things I wanted to mention about the Truth Be Told campaign is that another feature of it was data collection.
Aye.
And that is an ongoing issue, right? Yeah. But as we say, without data, all we have is an opinion. But we want our advocacy to be data-driven. So we started the campaign with a pre-campaign survey, and we currently have a post-campaign survey running. I'm not sure when this episode will be out, but I hope that your listeners would participate in a short survey just for us to assess where we are when it comes to awareness and perceptions of climate and gender justice.
Right.
And I have to make mention of our sponsors for the campaign. The campaign was made possible through grant funding from Canary with support from Open Society Foundation. So I have to acknowledge the support that we have in the region for this type of work. OSF has been funding a lot of climate justice work. So it's good that, we are able to access resources, especially as women in this space. There's the whole issue of the climate space being a boys' club, but that's a podcast episode for another day.
I know, right? By the way, so kudos to them. Open Society Foundation. Am I the only one that's not getting? How can I tap into that Open Society Foundation's support? And I say that to say, is it like an open call that they have? Is it a cold application? So not just asking for me, asking for a friend, but I'm sure there are other initiatives that could that would maybe be interested in their type of rollout that they've envisioned for themselves. So how is it that people can also tap into support from organizations like Open Society Foundation?
Yeah, so in this case, the funding came through Canary by way of Open Society would have funded or allowed Canary to be able to offer small grants.
Yes.
We were able to access that facility that, was made available by OSF. But in the case of CW4CJ, any organization, community-based or NGO, can develop a proposal and, approach OSF, and once it aligns with their interests, and what they are looking to fund, I think there's always potential there to get support. And, beyond OSF, I've been seeing a lot more funding opportunities popping up in the region. And that is very encouraging. I mean, it isn't always as accessible, to everyone. But again, this is where we see the value of partnerships, and being able to tap into these networks, and by coming together, building on our strengths, we have a better chance of accessing the resources that are out there.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, because when I thought about Canary, they've been doing great work in being able to bring these opportunities to smaller organizations. Because like you said, the challenge with accessing funds is the challenges are very layered. So sometimes it's not just about being able to make a convincing proposal. Sometimes it has to do with the structure of your organization. So even for those who are small, maybe they're not formally registered, and so many other things. And I love that Canary is taking this older sibling, whether it's big brother, big sister, or whatever, or older sibling approach to say, let me facilitate for you. Because even outside of climate and gender justice work, I know of them in other spaces that they've been able to be like micro distributors. They have been able to leverage their grant experience, to apply to receive grants, and then disseminate this to other organizations across the Caribbean for them to really carry out local resilience building work in their areas. So it's really great to see them really activate the power of partnership to benefit other groups like this as well. Yeah. So my next question for you, so I'm clearly seeing this map, beautiful map or path that you've trotted, climate conscious. I was gonna say climate consciously, but so for gender and climate justice, you've carved out that niche area, and already you spoke about what it means to be able to connect with so many diverse people and communities, underrepresented groups, and so forth in doing this work. But what do you want people who are new? Because you have people still asking the question, what's the link? Why focus on climate and gender justice. So through all of the work that have blended so nicely, the podcast episodes, the Caribbean Women for Climate Justice series, the Truth Be Told campaign, your work with the gender group, what does this represent? What do this represent? What do you want people to come away with when they are able to reflect on all of this?
Yeah, I mean, that's such a multi-layered question.
I know I am the queen of multi-layered questions. For people new to climate and gender justice, what is it that you want them to understand? Yeah.
Right. So at the start, the climate crisis threatens, our lives and livelihoods as Caribbean people. And what that could look like different things for different people. For the farmer, it could look like, loss of their crop and economic ruin because of drought or flooding. For coastal communities, it can look like displacement. For someone who's not directly affected by a natural disaster in their immediate, surroundings, it could also look like, the high cost of food, high food bill because of, climate-related impacts affecting our food supply. But even within that, those effects are not uniform. And we have to be mindful of those that are more exposed, and that includes women who lack economic empowerment or access to resources. That includes our disabled communities. It includes our indigenous people who live more in tune with the land and therefore are directly affected and immediately affected. So I just want people to take a more expansive view of climate change and how it impacts us, and to be more mindful in terms of when we think about the solutions that are needed. There's a lot. There are so many layers to the climate crisis, but we can't ignore it. Whether you live in the high rise or you live on, in a low income community, there is an impact, and therefore there is a role for you to play. As an individual, as part of an organization, as a company, as a policymaker. So it's just about expanding our minds when it comes to climate change and having a bias for action,
I like that outlook, having a bias for action. I feel like we've said all that we can say. No, well, not really. But I'm just saying you've given us a lot of food for thought, as well as the source of that food, in terms of how we're going to be able to pursue some of these actions and read upon getting to know and understand the extent of the work that you've done. I love that they also represent legacy products, because when I think about the Truth for Told campaign, people can go back to engage with some of these articles that have been written, the pieces that have been done, the podcast episodes that have been recorded. So there's so much there for people who don't understand. If you want to understand, you have to pursue knowledge. I remember when, maybe I segue here, but my dad being a Rastafarian, and people always ask the question, why didn't he grow me with dreadlocks? And as an adult, we were able to have the conversation, and my dad was like, there comes a point where for you to embrace a certain type of consciousness, you have to want to do it on your own. So the knowledge is there, you have to pursue it. So clearly, I didn't go that route, but I respect what he represents. But for gender and climate justice, for people who constantly ask, what's the connection? What really, we've done a lot, and we're still doing a lot in terms of putting out the information, doing activities, and just, raising the visibility of what it means. So it's all there for persons to connect with. And it's just been a beautiful body of work that you've been able to create, Derval. So I really have to ask, what's next for you? What's next for the Climate Conscious podcast? And no pressure, because I mean, if you want to pivot and if you want, but you know, we're hungry, we're insatiable.
Yeah, another multi-layered question. No, but I must say, like
That's a simple question, Derval. What's next?
so many possibilities, Dana Lynn. But when I reflect on my journey, I have to say that my steps have been ordered. And I just continue to grasp the opportunities that are before me. So I would say that I plan to continue to disrupt, to continue to challenge, to continue to work towards influencing systemic change. I think that's one of the big goals that I have, systemic change. And
yeah.
I also want to expand the reach of the podcast.
Yeah.
And something I want to circle back to is, early on in the podcast, you mentioned that we were kind of babes or maybe toddlers. But honestly, I think we are pioneers as Caribbean podcasters.
Yes.
We've been doing the work. We've been building out something from scratch.
Yes.
Kind of building the plane while flying it. So I think it's important for us to recognize the work that we have done as Caribbean podcasters. And I look forward to continuing that work to expand this emerging sector. I mean, it can be discouraging sometimes when you look at the opportunities that are available in the North American and even the European market for podcasters.
Yeah.
But I think in our own way, we are establishing ourselves as a force to be reckoned with.
Yeah.
So I look forward to, continuing to work alongside you and the other Caribbean podcasters in this space.
Yeah.
So more insightful conversations, more fruitful partnerships that show us that the alternative is possible.
Yes.
Resilience, inclusion, and sustainability can become the norm.
All right, they're there. So you see, Derval, that's why I don't apologize for the multi-layered questions. It might be uncomfortable, but guess what? I know you can handle it. And not just that, it gives an opportunity. I love raw and real answers, and so many gems, multi-layered gems that you came within that response, and even that part about building systemic change, So I love the response that you just gave. It's I felt inspired by that, looking at us as pioneers and pushing on. Just before jumping on this conversation with you, I also just wrapped up a previous podcast episode, and I told the guests that, I get a dopamine rush each time I complete an episode. There's a lot of anxiety in this production space, producing, putting out, will people listening, engage, but your response, is like a full circle of why we do this work. And so even when I ask you what next, sometimes I know, forgive me now if you felt pressure to feel like you need to produce something to say, oh, actually there's a next rollout. Sometimes it doesn't have to be that. And I love your response, because a lot of times I don't know what the next thing looks like for Global Yaadie or my other endeavors. But just the fact that I still know that there is something in the tank left. I want to continue to explore, do more, be better. Or even sometimes if you want to say take a break, reflect, revisit, those are perfectly fine as well. And I love the kind of conviction that you've just put out, even if it's not yet defined, but that there is more to do in this space, because this work is not finite. And that's amazing. So like we said, so much you've done, Derval, and coming into the end, I know people may have been already doing their research, looking up Truth Be Told, Climate Conscious, but how is it that they can interact with your platform and some of the wonderful work that you've produced or have been a part of?
Yeah, so they can definitely visit the website, theclimateconscious.com, as well as follow The Climate Conscious on Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, and YouTube. And they'll have the opportunity to review some of the amazing work that I've been a part of, especially the Truth Be Told campaign. There on YouTube, you'll also find the recordings of the panels that we've had, also for Caribbean Women for Climate Justice. So as you said, that there is a wealth of information for persons who are interested in learning more about this and hearing from their Caribbean people. So definitely check out our social media networks and feel free to reach out, slide in the DMs or an email. It's all about building community.
Yeah, absolutely. Derval, I'm sure you could see me. I know my listeners can't see me, and I'm going to work on that. But you've been seeing me throughout the podcast interview, so you know that I've been smiling throughout this time. And we spoke about it, the fact that, this is not our first time having a conversation, being on a podcast together. But I reflect now on the very first time that we met through the Island Innovation Ambassadors cohort. And it was a great, inspiring connection doing that first episode. And now I have to say, look at us now. I'm going to do a little hug to transfer to you, to give yourself a hug, not just because you came to the end of this day and this long episode, but you've done great. I'm proud of you. This is really good.
Thank you. And I'm proud of you too. The growth is evident.
Evident. It's amazing. So thank you so much, Derval. Maybe we need to do a yearly thing. I have a checking board, whatever it is. But thank you for gracing the Global Yaadie platform. And thank you for opening up yourself to all these amazing experience and pouring into the Caribbean community in the way that you have, in the global community in the way that you have. Truth be told, it's awesome. Truth be told is catchy, It should continue. Truth be told, you need to keep it going. Yeah, wow. Yeah, truth be told, it could be something. See, I can't stop saying it, but truth be told, this podcast has come to an end, the episode. But it's been amazing, Derval. So thanks again. Can't say it enough. And all the best for what's next.
Thank you, Dinalyn.
Thank you for listening to the Global Yaadie podcast. Follow us at Global Yaadie on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, and X. Subscribe to our YouTube channel or wherever you listen to this podcast at Global Yaadie, YAADIE.
Thanks for tuning in to the Climate Conscious podcast. We hope you found today's episode interesting, informative, and inspiring. Visit theclimateconscious.com for more info. I'm Derval Barzey, and this is the Climate Conscious Podcast.